Welcome to another edition of the Cardinal Reviews, featuring Final Fantasy 15.
What up, kids? We are going to do a review today of Final Fantasy 15. So, I have put about 85 hours into this game, completed the entire main quest, and have been doing a few post-game things. But if you don't know, if you've never heard of Final Fantasy or are from Mars, it is a long-running fantasy series. Oh my god. They pretty much revolutionized the turn-based combat type battle system. Started all the way back on the regular Nintendo. It's had it's made some of the greatest games ever made and some of the weirdest games ever made. But basically, Final Fantasy 13 came out and was bashed for its, Final Fantasy has been known for its open world kind of feel. It was like one of the first, that and Zelda were like two of the first games where you can kind of just like go anywhere. The OG open worlds, bro. So, Final Fantasy 13 did this whole linear thing, and it drove everyone insane, and lost a lot of fans. So, this game has been in the making for 8 years or something like that. I don't know. It's been in the making for a really long time. But Final Fantasy 15 is here. It's been delayed over and over again. It's supposed to come out years ago. But was it worth the wait? And I can say, in my opinion, abso-fucking-lutely, it was worth the wait. You can really tell. I mean, I don't know. You could tell the battle system has undergone so much stuff and everything, but man, this game was in development so long. One of the longest development cycles of a game I can remember. But basically, the pitch is you have this Final Fantasy universe, which usually involves crystals and chocobos and moogles and magic and long hair dudes with crazy cool hair. But take that theme and it sort of feels more like it's very heavily influenced by Western RPGs such as, Skyrim or the Witcher, which, I mean, the Witcher's not really Western, but those style RPGs where you're kind of just a guy and you have this big open area and you're exploring, forests and deserts and plains and so on and so forth. You travel with 4 guys. They're your buds. And what's cool is from the very beginning of the game, you're just like straight out the gate. These are your best friends, which is really cool because almost every RPG does this trope where it's like you meet people along the way. Oh, hey, there's so-and-so and can I join your party? Oh, sure. Jump on in. And then at the end of the game, we're all best friends. Well, this one, they start out as best friends. You're Noctis. You're the heir to the crown. You're this prince. You're kind of a brooding... really, the only thing you need to know is you're the Ninja Turtles. The main character is this... he's kind of come to terms with being a leader. He's he's going to be the king, which, whatever. So he's kind of the Leonardo character. And then you have his guard, the king's guard. His shield of the king is the Raphael character, Gladiolus. Then you have over here his butler type, the super smart cook genius guy who has a British accent. His name is Ignis. He's the Donatello. And then you have his best bud, the comic relief, who looks a lot like Cloud from Final Fantasy VII, and his name is Prompto. And they're on this road trip. And their car breaks down. Well, while they're on this road trip, all this crazy shit happens back at the capital with the king, the true king, and the dad and everything. And crazy shit happens. If you to really get a grasp on all that, you should probably watch the movie Kingsglaive, Final Fantasy 15 Kingsglaive, and to get a real sense of all the what to know about how all these friends know each other, you can watch this free to watch thing on YouTube called Final Fantasy 15 Brotherhood, and it shows how they all kind of know each other, why they're all best friends. But anyway, there's best friends, and you travel around with them. And they bicker and banter, and you have side quests. You have just there's so much to do right out of the gate, and this is so much in almost every way. This is an anti Final Fantasy 13. If you were a Final Fantasy fan and then you played 13 and you just were like, no, it's over, it's dead. And then they were like, well, what about we made 13 too? And you're like, no, I didn't want this. And then they're like, what about Lightning Returns? And they're like, no. I mean, that looked kind of better, but it still was not what we wanted. This is in every way an anti Final Fantasy 13 because from the right out of the gate, it's open world. I mean, it's like straight on. It's like, oh, you wanted to explore? Here you go. Here's a fucking car. Here's a bunch of planes to run around in and do tons of side. I mean, I spent the first probably 12 hours of the damn game just in the first area without even doing the first like story mission. I was just having a good time. And the other thing I want to bring up is the combat has changed. It's no longer turn-based. It's if you've ever played Kingdom Hearts, I mean, really the pitch, for this game, if we were in the office pitch for this game would be, let's make a game with Final Fantasy themes, Kingdom Hearts style battle system, a world that feels kind of like it kind of has like a Dragon's Dogma and Xenoblade Chronicles feel. Because at night there's these creatures. If it's very Dragon's Dogma, you like at first you don't want to go out at night because it's creepy, and these super powerful guys called demons, but spelled with like a demons, come out, and then that part's very Dragon's Dogma, and then but the world, the way you run around, the party system and stuff reminds me of, and just the scope and the scale of everything is very Xenoblade Chronicles. A little bit of Monster Hunter in there. There's some quests that you can take, the bounty missions. But anyways, the battle system it's not turn based. It's very much you hold one button to do this constant dodging, like phasing. You're like phasing, and it's even cooler than dodging because you leave behind like these little holograms. It's really cool to look at. And then you hold down another button to attack. And at first it's very simple, but then you get into counters and parries and blindside strikes, and you link strikes, and then there's a skill tree very reminiscent of the sphere grid from Final Fantasy X. And you can level up your own guys, so you can give them new skills, or you can just keep leveling up their original skills. You can level up your combat. You can level up just your base stats. There's so much to it. It's not like super complex, but there's a lot to it. It's called the Ascension Grid. The Ascension Grid, right? Yeah, I think that's right. But anyways, so yeah, you're the prince, and you have these cool side quests to do, and it's very distracting in the beginning. Very reminiscent of like Dragon Age, where there was this Dragon Age Inquisition, where there's this whole area in the beginning called the Hinterlands, and you could like get stuck there and you forget that you're supposed to keep going on with the story. Once I started getting into the meat of the story, so a lot of the criticisms I've been hearing about this game where the story doesn't make sense, or the story's nonsensical, and a lot of people didn't like, I will say this, chapter 9. If you're about to go into chapter 9, it becomes sort of linear for story purposes. And in a lot of the early reviews for this, they had me thinking like, oh, it's super linear and it just totally changes the game and it's unnecessary. Going in there, I didn't feel that at all, because at every point in the game, even when you're at the linear parts towards the end, you always have the option to go back and explore the open world. So you don't have. I mean, you can go back and do whatever you want. So it really doesn't feel that linear. It feels like, I mean, it just like in any Final Fantasy. I mean, there's linear parts towards the end because they're funneling you, towards this final epic boss fight. Speaking of epic, there's also magic, which comes. You could sap it from the ground from these things. Some people didn't like it. It's not as deep as some of the previous games' magic systems. Also, there's summons, which also aren't as. They're kind of more like they show up randomly when you're kind of down and out, but they're real spectacle to behold. Speaking of spectacle, like this whole game just is beautiful. I mean, the just in general the spell effects, the lighting, and the bloom, and the just the man when just certain things just look like awesome. This just some of your special attacks and things, just they look so good. It feels very much next gen. Now there's a little hiccup here and there. There's one early dungeon in particular that's kind of extremely ugly, and you see the real contrast. But these open world games are like that. Witcher 3 is one of the most beautiful games ever made, and then sometimes you go into an indoor location and you're like, really, am I still playing that same game? Because this like dungeon looks like shit. But that's just how these games are. And speaking of that, I mean, it is a little inconsistent. There's some issues. There's some frame rate dips. There's a lot of resolution issues that are especially notable when you go into these little gas station mini marts. There's just stuff on the shelves that's like the text on these like little boxes and stuff will be like real blurry. But then like you'll like look at a wall and the wall will have this great like HD sheen to it, and then you'll look over at another thing and it'll be real blurry, and it just kind of seems inconsistent. There's just some technical things. There's the control. I wish there was more control options. The controls take a little bit getting used to. Also, when you finally get a chocobo, which obviously you get chocobo, it's a Final Fantasy game. That's not a spoiler. It's just life. Refer to Anselmo's arm. When you finally get a chocobo, to jump is circle. To jump when you're playing is as a person is X. So that's weird. To sprint when you're on a chocobo is square, and to sprint when you're a person is circle or click the. I don't know. It just makes no sense. Why didn't they just make the chocobo control like the person does? Also, there's a section towards the end of the game where it turns into this weird. I don't want to spoil anything, but it's almost like a stealth style thing, and you are stripped of everything. So everything you've had, kind of, you got real badass at the combat, or you've gotten you leveled up your friends a lot, your guys that are on your team. And then you kind of get to this point where none of that matters. And it's fine. It's kind of cool, actually, because it changes things up. But after it lasts too long. It's probably about an hour and a half of gameplay. And it's very, very much just corridor. And there's some reused assets. It sort of starts to feel repetitive after a while. I felt like I would have been totally fine if they would have cut it in half. Again, that's a small gripe. I mean, this game, like I said, 85 hours, and that part, that's like 1 hour of it. So big whoop, right? So I'm just, it's a review, so I gotta be nitpicky. But overall, man, and then the other thing I want to mention is the villain. Arden, the villain, is just the goddamn actor who plays him is so good. I mean, he's so good. He's such a good villain, and he's got a lot of layers, and he's fun, and he's creepy, and he's psychotic, and he's just oily and snaky, and I don't know, man. There's just something about him. And early on in the game, he kind of shows up and he slinks around, and every time he's on screen, he's got a lot of magnetism, and he feels like kind of like Kefka, from FF6. I think that was what they were going for. And they, at one point, they even referred to him as the Jester. But yeah, he kind of makes these jokes, and he's really sarcastic. And there's even some times where there's a little bit of like the Joker in him, and there's a little bit of like Hannibal Lecter or something. It's just this creepy British guy, and he's just really he's really smart, and really he's really good at playing with you. And I think there's a lot of that. And the final confrontation in the game was, to me, one of the most epic boss fights. It was so great, and it felt right. My stomach was just like, oh, it was the butterflies, man, and I had chills. And it's everything I wanted from this game. And the other thing too I want to say is, I think the turn-based combat thing was, a lot of people don't like that it's moved on from that, right? But here's the thing. I think, the whole thing with turn-based combat was, back in the day, it was a way to make combat look flashy before they had the technology to make combat look flashy and awesome. And but don't get me wrong, I love turn-based. I mean, it's still got a special place in my heart. But I think this is the logical step for Final Fantasy. And honestly, it just, like in some of the most epic battles where your guy is literally like phasing in and out, like dodging, especially when you're dodging perfectly and you're parrying, and then you're jumping up in the sky and you're flying across with the pole arm, and you're just, kicking ass. And it just feels so, like, once you get the combat down, at first it seems weird, like oddly simple, and then it feels maybe a little clunky at first, because you're like, wait, what? How do I do this? And you realize you hold it down. But when you get it down and you're fighting some of the later fights in the game, some of the post game stuff, holy crap, man! It's just these. And then, the other thing I want to mention, the music is just fucking brilliant. Same chick who did the Kingdom Hearts soundtrack and a lot of other famous games, but it's just very. I mean, the music will swell in these really epic battles too. So and then sometimes it'll kick in with like some electric guitar, like dual like leads and stuff, and you're fighting, and it feels so fucking right, man. And it's just so much cooler to me in a Final Fantasy game to be flying across the sky, striking guys, and doing that than the standard turn-based combat. And I see why people might be divided on that, but I love it. I think it's the logical evolution for the series, and to me, this is what. To me, and this is, and a lot of people are going to disagree here, but this is, to me, what Metal Gear Solid 5 should have been. This is to the Final Fantasy franchise as what Metal Gear 5 should have been for Metal Gear. It actually has a wonderful conclusion. A lot of people say the story doesn't make sense, and I don't get that. I mean, dude, I hadn't even watched Kingsglaive, and I got it. I think some of it's open to interpretation, but Jesus Christ, dude, do you have to have everything spelled out for you? It's the same people who love Inception, and they're like, oh, Inception was great, but Final Fantasy didn't make any sense. Or I love The Matrix, but Final Fantasy didn't make any sense. I'm like, so what the fuck are you talking about, dude? Because, I mean, let's be honest. Convoluted shit is awesome. It is. It leaves a lot. I mean, stuff doesn't always need to be like spelled out for you. Sometimes it's nice to kind of, and then the ending is very much up for debate, and I'm really interested to talk with some of you who finished the game, and what your opinion is on what happened, because I know me and Selmo were talking about the end, and I kind of had a slightly different feel for the ending than he did, and when he told me his interpretation, I was like, oh shit, really? And then I don't know, it's really cool. But it's everything a Final Fantasy needs to be. It's epic. It's fun as hell. This is the fun. I mean, as far as, to me, Uncharted 4 is probably the best game of the year. But as far as the most fun I've had with a game this year, hands down, easy Final Fantasy 15. I can't stop playing it. And there's a little treat for you after you beat the game that just makes it even more fun and even more of a playground. And it just, man, I can't, like I said, there's a lot of technical issues, and then there's this big issue, towards the end, which actually they're talking about patching it out, which I think it would be a mistake. I think it's saying it's going back on something that, to me, you shouldn't. But it's like I said, it's everything a Final Fantasy should be. It's epic. It's fun. It's just like hours and hours and hours of just grinding but with a smile on my face, like just like going through and just kicking ass, and just you get more and more powerful, and you learn these new moves, and you learn these new types of strikes, or just leveling up and doing the side quests and exploring this beautiful, gorgeous world with this beautiful soundtrack, and with I think was a great story. I don't know what everyone's issue with the story was, but and a great villain. I mean, what more could you ask for? I mean, if we haven't had a great villain in a Final Fantasy game for how long? And to me, this is the best. This is the best Final Fantasy villain since Sephiroth. And so those are my thoughts. Now I'm gonna throw a score on there. Again, this game for me, if the technical issues weren't there, there's also a little bit of pacing issue here and there, and then there's some of the NPCs, the non-player characters, look weird, like real weird, like almost like last gen weird. And some of the animations are just kind of all over the place. And then there is some repetitive dialogue between the friends, which obviously after playing it for 85 hours, you're going to hear some of the same stuff. But some of it is too much. But that's really, I mean, this game is just so damn good, though. I mean, it's more than the sum of its parts. And in the end, you're just left with a supremely satisfying, epic adventure with your buddies. And your buddies, you just feel so connected to them, and they feel real, even though this isn't definitely hardcore Japanese. This is a very Japanese game. So if you don't like Japanese games, then don't fucking play this game, because it's Japanese all goddamn day. And then there's one side quest that involves cup noodles, which is basically a fucking infomercial. A side quest, it's like an infomercial for cup noodles. But then again, I don't know how much that paid for this game development. Maybe that saved this game from, they were like, maybe we shouldn't develop it. We don't have enough resources. And then they were like, well, maybe we should throw in a few advertisements for Coleman and Cup Noodle. And they were like, oh shit, maybe. And then they did. And then they were like, oh shit, we got enough money to finish the game now. So, there's a few blemishes. This game actually has a lot of blemishes, but it's so much fun. And it has such a good, satisfying, super climactic ending. And it's just so damn badass that I have to give it a 9 out of 10. Despite its technical shortcomings, it's still the most fun I've had with a video game this year, and I'm still gonna go play it. And if you excuse me, I gotta get back to my fucking regalia, boys. Peace out.